The trauma bay at Coastal Grace Medical Center never slept, and neither did Dr. Marcus Whitfield's ego. As chief of surgery, he ruled the hospital corridors like a general who had never lost a battle, his white coat pressed to perfection, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made residents flinch and nurses lower their eyes. He liked it that way. Respect, he believed, was something you demanded, not something you earned. And for 3 years, the quiet new nurse in Bay 4 had never once tested that belief, until the morning her scrub top slipped just enough to reveal the edge of something dark curling along her collarbone. Her name was Echo Reyes, and nobody at Coastal Grace really knew her. She showed up early, left late, spoke only when spoken to, and moved through chaos with a stillness that unsettled people more than it should have. The other nurses joked that she must have been a librarian in a past life. Dr. Whitfield had a different theory, that she was hiding something, that her silence was a performance, that underneath the calm was nothing but a woman playing at competence in a world of real professionals. He had never liked people he couldn't read. And Echo Reyes was the most unreadable person he had ever met. It happened on a Tuesday morning in the middle of the lobby in front of everyone. A patient handoff had gone sideways, a miscommunication about medication timing that Whitfield blamed, without evidence, entirely on the nursing staff. He stormed toward Echo with the fury of a man who needed someone smaller than himself to blame, and when he reached her, his hand shot out and yanked at her collar, exposing more of the tattoo than either of them intended. Skulls. Wings. A number inked in tight military stencil beneath a symbol he didn't recognize but instantly mocked anyway. "What is this supposed to be?" he sneered, loud enough for the waiting room to hear, loud enough for the students clustered by the nurses' station to freeze mid-step. "Halloween costume? You trying to look tough, Reyes? Because tough doesn't cut it in my ER. Competence does. And frankly, I don't see much of that from you." He jabbed a finger toward the ink like it was evidence in a trial, like he had caught her in some unforgivable lie. "Maybe you should spend less time decorating yourself and more time learning how this hospital actually runs." The room went silent. Nurses who had worked 12-hour shifts without complaint suddenly found their shoes fascinating. Residents who idolized Whitfield's talent in the OR had never seen this side of him, aimed at someone who couldn't defend herself. Or so they thought. Echo didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at him with an expression that had seen far worse than a man in a white coat throwing a tantrum in a hospital lobby, and said nothing at all. Her silence to Whitfield felt like victory. To everyone else watching closely, it felt like the eye of a storm. What none of them knew, what Echo had buried under 3 years of quiet shifts and unremarkable routines, was that the tattoo wasn't decoration. It was a memorial. Every skull represented a name. Every wing represented a mission that didn't end the way missions were supposed to end. The number wasn't random. It was a designation, one that belonged to a Joint Special Operations medical unit so classified that most people in uniform had never heard of it, let alone people in scrubs. Echo Reyes hadn't always healed people in clean air-conditioned trauma bays with backup 2 floors away. She had once done triage in the dark under fire, with nothing but her hands, her training, and a team who trusted her with their lives. She had asked for none of that to matter here. She had wanted more than anything to just be a nurse, ordinary, unnoticed, safe. But safety, it turned out, was a luxury the past didn't always grant. Whitfield walked away from the confrontation feeling righteous. Already composing the story he'd tell his colleagues over coffee about, putting the new girl in her place. He had no idea that 3 states away, a communications officer at a joint operations base had just flagged an emergency extraction request, codename Echo. The same call sign stitched quietly into medical files that very few people in the Department of Defense were authorized to see. He had no idea that within the hour, 2 Black Hawk helicopters would be cleared for immediate flight, cutting across restricted airspace toward the one hospital in the region equipped, on paper at least, to handle what was coming. He had no idea that the woman he'd humiliated in front of an entire lobby was the only person within 400 miles who had ever actually run this exact protocol before. In real combat, under real fire, with real stakes that made his idea of a bad morning laughable by comparison. By early afternoon, alerts started pinging through hospital administration. A call from a number nobody recognized, followed by a second call demanding immediate clearance for military aircraft to land on the adjacent helipad. The hospital's operations director, confused and scrambling, asked the obvious question. Why here? Why this hospital in this city out of every trauma center on the eastern seaboard? The answer came back in 4 words that would rewrite everything Whitfield thought he understood about the woman he had just humiliated. Per request of Echo. Whitfield laughed when he heard the rumor secondhand, assuming it was some clerical mix-up, some coincidence involving a call sign that had nothing to do with his quiet, forgettable nurse. He had no idea how wrong he was about to be proven. Not in a quiet correction behind closed doors, but in front of the same lobby where he had mocked her, with rotor blades roaring outside the glass doors and boots hitting marble floor with the unmistakable rhythm of men who moved like they had somewhere urgent to be. And at the center of it all, they weren't asking for the chief of surgery. They were asking for her. If you're feeling that chill already, imagine what happens next, because this story is just getting started, and you do not want to miss chapter 2. Hit subscribe right now so you don't lose this channel. Turn on notifications and stick around, because what walks through those doors next is going to change the way you see the quiet ones in Scrubs forever. The first sound was a low thrum that rattled the windows before anyone understood what it meant. Then it grew, became a roar, became something felt in the chest more than heard in the ears. Patients in the waiting room clutched their families. Staff rushed to the glass doors. Outside, against a gray afternoon sky, 2 Black Hawk helicopters descended onto the hospital's helipad with a precision that spoke of hundreds of hours of training, kicking up a storm of dust and loose paper across the ambulance bay. Dr. Whitfield, still riding the high of his earlier confrontation, stepped toward the doors along with everyone else, assuming this was simply an incoming trauma case, another day, another emergency to command. He was wrong. This wasn't a patient transport. This was an extraction team. The doors slid open and 6 operators moved through them in tight formation. Tactical gear still dusted with transit grime. Weapons secured but present. Faces set in the particular calm of men who had done this 100 times before, and intended to make it 101 without incident. The lobby, moments ago filled with the ordinary noise of a hospital day, went utterly silent. Whitfield opened his mouth to demand an explanation, to assert the authority that had never once been questioned within these walls. And then the lead operator spoke, cutting through the moment like a blade. "Where is she? Where's Echo?" Whitfield blinked, confused, before understanding crashed over him with the force of the rotor wash still swirling outside. Echo. The nurse. His nurse. The one he had grabbed by the collar that very morning. The one whose tattoo he had mocked in front of an audience. The one he had dismissed as beneath his notice. Before he could form a response, a voice cut through the crowd. Steady, clear, carrying none of the hesitation it had held all morning. "I'm here." Every head turned. Echo stepped forward from behind the nurse's station, and something about her had changed, though nothing about her appearance had. Same scrubs, same tired eyes, same quiet posture. It was the way the operators reacted that told the real story. Every one of them straightened. One of them, the team leader, broke formation just enough to close the distance and speak to her directly, respect radiating off him in a way Whitfield had spent his entire career trying and failing to command from people half this room's size. "Ma'am, we need you." Teams pinned near the coast mass casualty situation. No field medic with your clearance level within reach. Command authorized pickup the second your name came back in the system. "We need Echo Actual now." The room absorbed those words in pieces. Hecho actual. A call sign. A designation reserved, as everyone would soon learn, for combat medics who had completed the most demanding trauma protocols the military offered. Protocols so intensive that fewer than a handful of people in the entire country currently held active clearance. Whitfield's mind raced backward through years of assumptions, replaying every quiet moment, every steady hand during codes that should have rattled anyone, every calm word during crises that sent junior staff into panic. It had never been inexperience. It had been restraint. She had been holding an entire ocean behind a dam of silence, and he had spent the morning mocking the one piece of it that had slipped into view. Echo didn't hesitate. She turned to the charge nurse, rattled off a handoff report with the crisp efficiency of someone who had done this under far worse conditions than a hospital shift change, grabbed a bag that had apparently been packed and ready in her locker for exactly this kind of call, and moved toward the doors alongside men who treated her not as a colleague but as the mission's most valuable asset. Whitfield finally found his voice. Stepping into her path with the same authority, he always used to stop people in their tracks. You can't just leave. You work here. You answer to me. Echo stopped. For the first time all day, she looked directly at him, and the silence she offered this time carried an entirely different weight than the one from that morning. Not today, she said simply. Today I answer to people who don't need to raise their voice to be obeyed. She didn't wait for a response. She didn't need one. She walked past him, past the stunned crowd, out through the doors and into the wash of rotor blades, disappearing into the second Black Hawk as it lifted off the pad and banked hard toward the coastline, carrying away the one person in that hospital who had quietly, for 3 years, been capable of things none of them could imagine. The lobby stood frozen long after the sound of the helicopters faded into the horizon. Whitfield remained exactly where he had stopped her, his authority suddenly feeling smaller than it ever had, his earlier words about her tattoo echoing back at him with a cruelty he hadn't intended but couldn't now escape. The story of what happened that afternoon spread through the hospital within hours, through the city within days, and by the time Echo Reyes returned to Coastal Grace 2 weeks later, quiet as ever, scrubs pressed, tattoo covered once more beneath her collar, not a single person in that building looked at her the same way again. Least of all Marcus Whitfield, who never mentioned her ink, or raised his voice at her, ever again. Some people wear their strength loudly. Others carry it in silence, waiting for the one moment the world forces them to show it. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button right now, turn on notifications, and drop a comment telling us what you'd have done in that lobby, because we have dozens more stories like Echo's coming, and you will not want to miss a single one.